I'm not going to be excited about summer knitting. I cannot find it in me to come up with ideas or plans just for it all to fall out of place and to not like it in the end and it all to fail. And I came across a sweater pattern and my first thought was, "Ah, that would be so cute as a tank top. Maybe I'll just omit the sleeves." And then I saw that the designer thought the same thing, and she's actually coming out with the tank top version of this sweater. So I'm very excited about this. Please don't rain on my parade.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for joining me for a midweek episode today. I am so happy to finally be sitting down and chatting about my summer knitting plans, dreams, ambitions. Obviously, I am way late to the summer knitting planning game, but I have my reasoning for that, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more throughout the video. So yeah, today we're going to go through some plans as well as reviewing the spring knitting plans and how that all sort of turned out and just figuring out how I can best manage my knitting organization in the future. And this is an evolving process. So I am glad that you guys are here for the ride. And I think that without further ado, we should just go ahead and dive on in. So if you haven't been here before, like I said, I'm Nora, and I have created these seasonal knitting plans videos for the past few seasons. I had done winter knitting plans, I had done spring knitting plans, and now we're here in summer. And I did really like at the beginning of spring going through and looking at my winter knitting plans and sort of what worked and didn't work and using that to move forward. So I am here with my iPad today. If you see me looking at it, honestly, I'm probably just going to hold it up for a good bit of time because there's a lot to read off of here. But let us go ahead and review sort of what was on the docket for spring knitting. Now, my whole sort of theme of spring knits, it was all around the idea of Stash Bust Spring. I had hosted a knit along and it went so well. So many people participated, so much fun. And so all of the plans that I had were based off of yarn that I had in stash that I was hoping to move through and figure out something to do with. So these were the sort of general plans. We had some yarn and stash that was the Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool in the colorway Oatmeal that I had intentions to create two different projects with. One was pairing it with these nature spun thrifted yarns that I had in these different sort of autumnal colors. And the idea with that was to be a sort of striped sweater. I was tossing around the idea of the Sibling Sweater by Laura Penrose, the Leith Cardigan by Rebecca Clow. I'm not sure if I had mentioned at the time, but also the Stripe Pipe Sweater by Veronica Lindberg. The other intention with the Oatmeal Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool was to combine it with another set of thrifted yarns, which were just these red and blue unmarked cones that I had, into the what did someone said? It was the Inga, I believe. The Inga sweater solo. I didn't write down the name. I think that's Lene Homestead, something like that. I'll make sure that the designer names are on the screen. The next plan that I had was involving the thrifted Knit Picks Bear yarn that I had in my stash, and that was intended to be knit into the Texo sweater by Jeanette Knits. The other yarns I had were the True Boo Sparkle as well as the True Boo yarn, as well as this Universal Yarns linen sparkly lace weight yarn. And those I had intentions to knit into a simple tank or tee. I had some boucle thrifted yarn cones that I was really interested in knitting into a puffer vest of sorts. The next thing I had was this DK Cashmerino Verde Musco thrifted cone in this green grassy sort of color, and I was imagining it in a button-up vest and was considering the Florence tank by Sari Nordland. There was also the infamous hot dog yarn, thrifted, unlabeled, but certainly a wool that I was considering knitting into a skirt, but also was considering possibly using that autumnal yarn that I had mentioned earlier and combining the two or something else to create the Stitches sweater by Veronica Lindbergh. So those were sort of the overall general dreams. Of those, I had a top 3. And those were the Florence tank by Sari Nordland, the Texo sweater by Jeanette Knits, and that True Boo and linen t-shirt or tank top, which evolved into the Farnham tee. So of those top 3, I did complete my Farnham tee in that bamboo True Boo linen combo. I started the Florence tank by Sari Nordland, and I did not get to the Texo sweater, and I have my reasonings. Now let's move into the projects that I actually did complete within Stash Bust Spring. First of which was carried over from the winter knitting into spring, and that was the Folklore cardigan by Lion Brand, which I had knit up for my cousin Emma. And I actually have a whole video about how I knit this cardigan and modified it and also simplified the process. So if you're interested in knitting the Folklore cardigan, I definitely recommend that you check out that video. So I finished that during spring. I also finished that Farnham tee, which was using the is it Lion Brand True Boo? A lot of Lion Brand here. That was using that True Boo yarn held with the Universal Yarn Sparkle. This was the first official Stash Bust Spring project that was complete, and I'm so happy with that. I also started and completed the Azucena pullover, for which the yarn was gifted to me by Unit Toronto, as Claudia Quintilla had designed the sweater and gifted the yarn and pattern for me to knit that. So I started and finished that in Stash Bust Spring. It was part of my goals, but not part of the actual Stash Bust of spring. It was just spring goals. And then we had the Stripe Hype sweater by Veronica Lindbergh of Katowice. I wound up knitting that out of some Stash Bust Spring yarn. So I did use the Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool held with those autumnal balls of yarn, as well as a leftover bit of Cascade 220 superwash that I had left over. So all stash yarn for that project as well. And then the most recent finished object is actually still on the blocking mats as I'm filming this, but that was another Veronica Lindbergh pattern, and that was not part of the spring knitting plans whatsoever. However, it wound up being another stash busting project, the Sailor Swift top, which I used leftover yarn from that Azucena pullover. So the Knitting for Olive merino that I had been gifted for that, I used for the project. So those are the completed projects by the end of spring. I also have a few whips that are going to be moving with me from spring into summer. Those are the Florence tank, which was Stash Bust Spring, so that was a stash busting project started in spring. It's moving with me into summer. The other one is the Sand cardigan by Maria Isayeva of Ulin Knitwear, which I am knitting out of Nora Majara in the colorway 01 Sake. That was actually a project that was carried over from winter into spring, now into summer too. I also have more recently started projects, the Tolsta tank by Rebecca Clow of the Crayabea, which you could consider a stash busting project. I am knitting that out of some thrifted cotton that I had picked up during spring. And the last whip that's coming with me into the summer is the Feel Good cable sweater by Anne Catherine Stoll, which I am knitting out of Barocco Ultra Wall Chunky. So if we're looking at the projects that were completed during the spring, the ones that had been planned, the ones that were not planned, and then also looking at the projects that were started but not completed, I am pretty happy. So we had a total of like 7 or 8 sort of stash busting plans, plus the plan to finish the Folklore cardigan, the Azucena pullover. And so I guess you could call it about 8 or 9 different planned projects, and I finished a total of 5 projects and started 4. So I guess like the numbers are actually kind of there. It's just that all of the projects were not the ones that I had planned. And now I can get into a little bit of why some of those projects that I really thought were going to work out just didn't. First of all, one of like the most hyped things that I wanted truly so badly to knit during the spring was the Texo sweater by Jeanette Knits. And the reason that this actually didn't come to fruition, it was very calculated. After a little bit of looking at the plans at my stash, at the yarn that came in during the spring that I didn't expect, a local yarn store went out of business during spring. And so I had plans to not purchase really much, if any, yarn during the spring. And then the deals that came along with that yarn shop closing kind of just threw that off. So for the Texo sweater, I was actually going to have to purchase quite a bit of yarn to supplement what I had in my stash to complete that project. And after spending so much money at the local yarn shop that had closed, and also just looking at the logistics of like having 5 skeins of yarn and then supplementing with about 5 skeins of yarn, it didn't really add up in either a like monetary way, but also not in just like, I don't know, that's a lot of yarn to be supplementing to risk it not matching up quite right. So ultimately, I decided that the Knit Picks Bear yarn could be put to better use later on as a striped sweater. I have so many plans for sort of just simple black and white striped sweaters, and I feel like the quantity that I have already in my stash would be enough for something like that. And so I figured for the Texo sweater, I'll need to purchase a brand new sweater's quantity of yarn, and it just wasn't in the budget with all the other purchases that I had made. So that's definitely still a huge priority of mine to knit. It's definitely a sweater that I still look at, and it really takes my breath away when I see it, which is not typical for me. So it's a really big dream and goal of mine to get done in the future, just not right now. So that's why the Texo sweater didn't totally get done. Otherwise, the Florence tank, if you follow along with my podcasts, you know that I hit a pretty major snag in the decreases for this lace tank top, and it was enough to sort of just soil the whole trajectory of that project. And I honestly just needed to take a step back from it to sort of accept where things were at with it. Now, in the past few weeks that it's pretty much just been in hibernation, I have come up with a plan of attack on how to get back on track with that project, get it done, really want to get that done. And so it's just a matter of now, when do I have like a week that I could zero in on that project alone without feeling like I'm missing out or doing it like begrudgingly. So that's kind of where my head's at with the Florence tank. Of the other projects that were sort of at the forefront that didn't get done, I would say that the Inga sweater is a big one that I definitely want to do. That is what that yarn is reserved for, and I just feel like that's a little bit more of a warm or cool weather knit, and so it just wasn't feeling so high priority during the spring. It won't be in the summer either, but it's definitely, that's what that yarn is reserved for now. The other one that I feel like wound up just really getting me excited after creating my video for spring knitting plans, that was that puffer vest. That's going to be a reversible boucle and plain cream puffer vest. And I just think that that's going to be such a great project for the fall that I wasn't too keen on like devoting a ton of time to it just to not be able to wear it right away. So again, I think it's another really solid plan, and I'm really happy with that. It's just not getting done right now. Now, I think that the big one that's standing out as like, this was just not going to happen, was anything involving the hot dog yarn. And another really big reason I wanted to do Stash Bust Spring was to use stash, but also evaluate my stash and destash and find new homes for some of these yarns. And I'm not sure why, but there's a part of me that just can't get rid of this hot dog yarn, even though I don't think it's a flattering color for me. And I think that the fiber's kind of scratchy and unpleasant. So it's going to hang out a little bit longer. I don't know if I'm just stubborn and want to find a way to use it. I kind of have this thing with clothing that other people might think is ugly or something that I'm like, I'm going to find a way to make that work. And I don't know if that's bleeding into my desire to knit with this hot dog yarn, but it's going to linger a little bit longer. And so we'll see when I actually get time to sit down and do some stash busting, do some destashing, and get rid of some yarns that just have no place in my stash anymore. Maybe I'll reconsider what I'm doing with that yarn at that point. That also just reminded me that there was one other project that was just not in my actual knitting plans. I did do a little bit more stash busting during the spring as I crocheted my messy dressy, which was done out of some Lily Sugar and Cream cotton yarn, as well as the thrifted cones that I did have sitting in my stash of these two different blue colors I merled together. So that was another thing that got done during the spring. Now, having said all of that, I have been stuck a little bit in trying to figure out how to go about planning my summer knits. I enjoy the process of planning these things because I do feel like I can get a little bit like decision fatigued, and it's nice for me to have thought about things in advance. And so when it comes time to cast on something new, I'm not feeling like I'm just floundering and trying to come up with something, or suddenly I want to cast on something and I don't have the yarn for it. I don't know. I like the idea of having these plans to organize my thoughts, but to also have a sort of like tangible thing that's there for me when I need it. The issue is that I really put so much consideration and time and planning into my spring knitting, and I didn't feel like it exactly fulfilled itself in the outcome. So I really felt like I was so thoughtful in the plans I made for the spring, but then when it came time to actually sitting down and knitting in the spring, I didn't actually feel particularly satisfied with what I was knitting and what I was producing. And overall, it left me feeling a little bit unmotivated, a little bit uninspired. Now, I think looking at it in retrospect, I think that having the sand cardigan as such a huge project, sitting on the needles for so long, it was contributing to things feeling like they just weren't moving off the needles. I also felt like I had really great plans according to the yarns that I was matching up those plans and patterns with. However, didn't really take into consideration the actual knitting process of it all and the concept of having my own personal schedule as far as work and just other things that were taking up some brain capacity. And then these really elaborate knitting plans, I don't think I realized that across those spring knitting plans, there was not a single, like, just basic, mindless knitting pattern. And I learned that that was an issue for me. And so while I felt like I had this stockpile of plans, when it actually came time for me to cast on something new, I didn't feel like I had anything that could actually satisfy and feed that part of me that was lacking, that mindless knitting. And something that I learned earlier this year as part of my general 2024 knitting plans, it was that I really do need to focus on having a mindful project and a mindless project at the same time if I'm going to have more than one whip on the needles at once. I cannot have two mindful things. That does not work. And I really shouldn't have two mindless things. I get bored then. So this is something that I need to prioritize from now on when I'm making my knitting plans. So now fast forward a little bit, the last project that I completed in the spring, it's bled into the summer, and that was the Sailor Swift tank. That was cast on out of serious need for a mindless project. And what I didn't know is that I would fall in love with knitting that pattern. I really enjoyed the quickness of it, but also not too quick as it's knit up on a fingering weight yarn, a light DK. And so having knit that, I think, sort of reinvigorated my interest in summer knitting and the projects that I would both enjoy while they're on the needles, but then also be able to enjoy when they're off the needles. So while I had thought in the spring that I would be fine just knitting up some winter projects, I've decided recently that I would like to knit on some things that are meant to be worn in the summer, possibly more sort of like seasonal layering pieces. So it's not specifically just for summer. But I think that all the projects that I kind of have on my mind, on my needles, are things that could get used year round. And I think that that's going to be the trick for me for summer knitting. So let's talk about it. I've already mentioned the projects that are coming with me from spring into summer, but that does include a chunkier, beachier sweater. So that's something that when I finish, I will be able to get some wear out of on chillier evenings or air-conditioned spaces, but it still has a summery, beachy vibe about it. I also have the Tulsa tank on my needles, which I think is going to work really well as a layering piece come fall, come spring next year. I think it'll be great to wear on its own as a cotton tank, but then also underneath a blazer or a cardigan. I think that that is going to work very well. And even if it doesn't, it's a quick enough knit and a cheap enough knit that I can justify the sort of, what's the word? There's a word that I'm going for, but just that sort of like, the frivolousness of it all. So that's good. And those two are the most present on my mind because those are the most like summer cast-ons. I guess they were sort of technically cast on in the summer. So it's just that I'm making this video late. Now, I have decided for summer knitting plans to sort of talk about my summer knitting dreams and ambitions and then more firm cast-on plans, sort of like I did in the spring. And yeah, we'll see how this goes again. So if we're talking general dreams. So last summer, I had spent the majority of the summer knitting up a fingering weight ankle length oversized t-shirt dress. And I really loved having that on my needles for this summer because it was so much mindless knitting, stockinette in the round. It came with me everywhere. I worked on it everywhere. I worked on it all summer and I loved that. And I thought that that would be a good ritual to sort of have. So the first thing I had done was start looking into other dresses and things that I could knit. And then I sort of had this dilemma of, as much as I loved knitting that project and I loved the finished garment, I don't get so much wear out of it. And I was hesitant to purchase another full dress quantity of yarn to not wear it as much. So I had some hesitations around it. Now, after really sorting through all of the dress patterns, there was one that stuck out to me, and that was called the Catherine dress, and it's part of a book by Melissa Leapman. It's called 30 Knits, Top 30 Hot Knits, something like that. But what I loved about this dress is that it was knit on a slightly chunkier gauge, so it's not a fingering weight. It's actually more of a worsted weight pattern. I liked the idea of that because my thing with the fingering weight is that it's such a fine gauge that I do find I feel a little bit self-conscious in it, in that it's like sort of clinging into all of the places that I'd maybe not want it to. And so I like to wear that with like a blazer on top or a jacket on top, but wearing it on its own, I feel a little bit exposed. So the idea of a worsted weight dress was more appealing to me so that it could just give me like a little bit more of that buffer that you couldn't exactly see every lump and bump underneath the knit fabric. So I liked that. I also liked the visual interest of the ribbing on this dress. However, it's not so visually interesting or would require so much focus. Like I could knit 2x2 in the round. I'll be okay. Although that's the thing, it's not knit in the round. It's knit flat, which is also fine because it's ribbing. But I thought maybe I could modify that. Really, the number one thing about this dress that had my attention was this sort of crisscrossing diamond medallion of sorts in the center of the bust. And I thought that this just made for such a gorgeous, classy, timeless dress. And I thought that this dress knit in a either olive green or a black or yeah, really those two, that would be something I could wear forever, which then made me feel like it should have a sort of more formal quality to it. And then it made me think silk. And then I went to knitting for olive pure silk. And then I saw the price tag and I thought that's going to have to wait. But that is something that is sort of on my mind. And if the right circumstances come along, it could be knit up this season. So that was the first sort of dream. After that, I also have the pattern for the Karina tee by Sari Nordland. Another tee that's meant to be knit in this pure silk held double. It's just so not budget friendly in my opinion for my use, but I love this tee for the cabling and the drama, but also just when it's done in such abundance and in one color, it becomes very classic and wearable and timeless again. So I love the idea of this tee, but it's probably not going to happen this summer. This is just like general knitting goals. I just really love this pattern and I have it as it was a pattern I selected as my sort of compensation for doing a Sari Nordland test knit last year. Another dream that I have is to possibly knit up another boulevard bag by Lily Kate France using this black raffia yarn that I had thrifted a while back. It's actually sort of sitting currently halfway through a crochet hat project that just did not pan out from a year or two ago. And so I could see a world in which I unravel that hat and knit it into the boulevard bag by Lily Kate France. I do imagine it's going to be rough on my hands and is potentially not going to look quite right because the bag is meant to be knit on a wool in a bulky weight. So I'm not sure, but I did like the idea of this because I get a lot of wear out of my boulevard bag I knit up earlier this year in a boucle yarn. So I wanted a sort of summer version and I like that idea. The final sort of general dream that I have is to use up some yarn that I just purchased recently, the Sandnes Garn Sunday, the petite knit version that I bought enough that I could knit up another little tank top. So either another Sailor Swift top without the stripes or possibly another Tulsa tank. But I'm thinking if I did this color, it would look nice in the square neck version. So that's just something that I can kind of have on the docket as quick, easy, mindless knitting if I need it. Now, other than that, my dreams were drifting into a lot more of these tank top vest styles. Similar to the Florence tank, I just really love this idea of a tank top that works as a vest in the fall and winter. But even if it doesn't, I just am really loving the trend, the look of these vests. And earlier this spring, I basically built myself a small linen capsule wardrobe that I could wear for work. And I found it to be really, really helpful for just grab and go early work mornings, and everything sort of goes together. And I liked the idea of adding some knitted pieces to also mix and match with this capsule wardrobe. And this is where the plans get a little bit more concrete. So let us start by talking about the one that I have the yarn for already. So just this past weekend, I wound up going to Webb's America's Yarn Store with the hopes of sort of firming up my summer knitting plans. And I like going there because they have everything, not everything, but they just have so much yarn that I can touch and feel and play with. And I was able to use that experience to affirm the ideas that I had, to pair yarns with project dreams that I was thinking of, or to sort of like cancel out other ideas that I have. So I really like to do that when I'm feeling kind of stuck and I have so many ideas. I like going to a yarn shop where I can just touch and feel and maybe purchase, as a lot of the summer knitting plans I have would involve summer fibers, and I don't have really any of those in my stash. So there was going to be purchasing involved, which just added this other layer of like stress around summer knitting for me. So I went to Webb's. I poked around, I felt all of the yarns, and the great thing about Webb's is that there's this back warehouse where there's a ton of sale yarn. And as a bargain girl, that is my happy place. I tend to kind of go where the sales take me, and that's exactly what happens. I found this yarn and I thought it would be so cool for one of the broader knitting plans that I had, one of these little vests. And so I decided to go ahead and purchase the yarn. This is the Nora. Maybe I could look this up. How to pronounce Asagino. Okay, I can find nothing that tells me how to pronounce this, so I'm gonna call this Asagino. Asagino, something like that. This is a beautiful yarn that is, I guess, maybe not so much of a yarn as it is a paper. So this yarn is 69% linen, 30% paper, and 1% polyamide. And it says Japanese traditional art paper enhanced with French linen. The color that I chose, it's called color number 16, and it is the most gorgeous. This color, I think, is my color of the year personally. This is the color I want to knit everything in right now. And it's hard for me to find this color in stores, so I liked for just garments in general. So I like the idea of knitting something in it. But it's basically if you were to melt dark chocolate. It has a very cool undertone to it, but there's a lot of dimension that range from a true next to black dark chocolate color all the way up to more of like a milk chocolate. The yarn is essentially made up of this Japanese paper that comes in like very small skinny strips, and then I think it's held with two or three threads of what I'm guessing is the linen, and then it's kind of all wrapped up in what is the polyamide. So that's kind of holding all of these things together. Now, it's certainly an interesting fiber choice for a garment. I looked it up on Ravelry to see if anyone was using this for garment knitting, and primarily people would use it for open work lace, and it looks beautiful. But there are a few people who actually knit this at a tighter gauge and produce a true fabric out of it. Now, I'm not sensitive to fibers generally speaking, and I actually liked the idea of this papery interesting texture for a vest. That was actually what I was looking for. So when I saw this, it just hit the nail on the head. And I've since then swatched with it. I used 3.5 millimeter needles to create my swatch, and I just have it here on some try it on tubing because I'd like to block it and then still use the yarn. But the fabric that it creates is this very like accordion like fabric. It has an interesting give to it where it's not stretchy, but unblocked. It just creates this sort of folding and unfolding like paper would. And obviously, without wool or actual hair fibers to fill in gaps, the fabric that's produced is very holey. You could see through it entirely. However, when it's on the skin and the light's not coming through it, it's not sheer. It's well, I guess it is sheer. It's not totally see-through. It just has this sheerness about it. And I personally am loving the fabric. So I'm thrilled with the fabric that I got. You could see that it has a stiffness to it, but I've been trying to sort of crumple this up, as they say to do with linen, and I'm guessing with paper too, to sort of crush those fibers a little bit and wear them in. And the more you do, it just gets so beautiful. So I'm planning to steam block this. They say to dry clean only, and so a steam block seems like the appropriate move. However, I'm just really thrilled with the fabric that I got. Now, it's not on gauge for the pattern that I plan to pair it with, but I figure I'll make that work as I go. So I have decided with this yarn fabric, I'm going to be knitting up the Vest Claire, the Claire vest. It says Vest Claire by Mochi Knits. And this is one of those very trendy in tops right now where the front, it's a little waistcoat, it's a little vest that buttons in the front. You could also tie it. I think I plan to do buttons. And the two edges are supposed to just sit next to each other with then those button or tie closures keeping them there. And so there's no overlapping, which in sewn garments and other knit garments that I've seen like this, it's always perplexed me because I imagine that what's very cool and chic about this is the fact that there's sort of nothing underneath and you just see skin through those little gaps. But that's just sort of not my thing. And so I thought it would then look strange to pair it with like a tank top or a t-shirt underneath. I thought that would look a little funny and kill the vibe a little bit. But since this fabric is already so open, I'd have to wear something underneath. And therefore, I don't think it would kill the vibe at all to see through those little slits in the front, that same tank top. I think it would just make sense. And therefore, I thought it would be a great time to try out a vest top like this. Personally, I would probably just wear a sort of nude colored tank underneath that would be otherwise invisible. So it still has a little bit of that illusion, but at my own personal comfort level. And I just really love the sleek finishes on this particular vest. I like the sort of minimal, I don't know if it's double knitting or I-cord edges, but it just looks very clean and tidy to me. So that is my first sort of cast-on plan of summer, is with this Nora Asaginu yarn and the Vest Claire by Mochi Knits to create a very summery linen paper vest. I'm very excited about this. Please don't rain on my parade. So that is summer knitting plan kind of number one, concrete. Now, in the same sort of department of these little vests that I just love so much, I came across a sweater pattern a few months back, and my first thought was, oh, that would be so cute as a tank top. Maybe I'll just omit the sleeves. And then I saw that the designer thought the same thing, and she's actually coming out with the tank top version of this sweater. So it's the clematis tank vest top. The designer is Emma Mayer of Emma's Knits on Instagram, and the original design I had seen was the clematis sweater, and it's not even out yet, but she says very soon. I said I'm not so patiently waiting, but I will, and that's going to be the clematis vest. Essentially, it is just this really sweet DK weight, I believe, tank top and sweater. They're both the same design detail, just the sweater has the sleeves and the tank top doesn't. But it's basically this little mini buttoned sweater tank where the buttons go across diagonally. And I just think that that is enough detail and originality to set this apart from a store-bought garment that I would be so over the moon happy to knit it. At the moment, I'm thinking of knitting this particular clematis vest in black, and I am considering using the Sandnes Garn Lena for this pattern, with the intention then of also using the Drops Bell, which people say is the sort of direct comparison in another project I'm about to tell you about, so that I can kind of compare and contrast and tell you guys what we think about the different budget options for this linen, cotton, viscose summer fiber. So as soon as that comes out, I'm basically ready to pull the trigger on buying some yarn and knitting that up. Like I said, in black, I think that's gonna go really well in my little capsule wardrobe for work. Now, the last thing that sort of satisfied my desire to have a dress, or that's just sort of reliable, mindless tube throughout the summer without knitting a dress, was to do separates. And I love a good knit set. I have yet to, well, I do have one, but I've yet to make one that works for me. And this caught my eye a long time ago, probably whenever it came out, and I forgot about it. And in doing research for this video, I came across it again and decided that is the one. So this is the Cordelia set. There's a skirt and a top by Witchery design. Let's call it Witchery. And it's basically just a striped button front tank with a maxi skirt, midi maxi skirt of the same stripes. And so the little capsule linen wardrobe that I've been wearing throughout the summer is made up of a black linen shell and a tan linen shell and a black linen wide leg set of pants, and then a tan linen wide leg pants, and a black midi maxi skirt. And I have been getting so much more wear out of that skirt than I ever would have thought. So I love the idea of having a striped set to sort of bring all this together. And so my thought is to use that Drops Bell for this set. It's actually one of the called for yarns in the pattern, and to knit this up in a sort of off-white, tan, and black stripe. And I think that then it will go perfectly with all of those other elements, plus adding in the clematis vest would be so great for all of those things, as well as the little Claire vest in the chocolatey linen paper, I think would just go so well with all of the things. So that is the last sort of more ambitious, but still like really want to cast on plan that I have. Of course, saying this out loud, it always seems so ambitious. But I am excited finally about summer knitting, and it's because of these projects and because of these plans. And I think that just working through some summery things that I will be able to wear throughout the fall still, it gets me excited. I don't know. And then I can leave the true cool weather knitting for the cooler weather. Now, the last sort of thing that I'd like to do during summer is actually modify a knit that I have already. The very first 2 garments I ever knit were this sweater and short duo that were each knit using drops free patterns, and I knit them both out of this thrifted Patons yarn. It was Patons Paradiso. It's a cotton yarn. It has a really fun, slubby sort of texture to it. And I really love the fit and the vibe of those 2 finished pieces. However, just like the hot dog yarn, I come back to the fact that the color of it is just not so well suited for me. And I had hoped that in the summer with a little bit of a tan, it would be better. But realistically, I don't get that tan. And when I'm wearing this, it's usually like in a state of relaxing, and so without makeup and anything else to like enhance my features, and so it just doesn't really look the best on me. And so I recently actually picked up some Rit dye that I'm hoping to dye these 2 garments into more of like a coral sort of vibrant color, and therefore will hopefully wear them a lot more in the spring summer seasons for years to come. So those are the plans for knitting and knitwear items in the summer. Obviously, right now, as it stands, I would like to wrap up the Tulsa tank for sure before I cast on something new, as well as the Feel Good cable sweater. So I think I'd like to try to keep the other projects in the background still going. So that being the sand cardigan and the Florence tank, as those are intended to be knit on in moments when I can focus specifically on them. And then as the Tulsa tank comes off the needles, I can sort of choose from my more mindless knitting, being that Sunday yarn being knit into a tank top, or the witch tree design midi skirt, that being mostly a long tube. That would be great mindless knitting. And then as the Feel Good cable sweater comes off of the needles, I can shift into all of my little vest tops that I plan to create. Which I wondered if it would feel redundant to just knit up a bunch of these little vest tops, but I really do get so much use out of garments like that. And I love the fact that it would be 3 little button-up vests that are so vastly different. If you can't tell, I'm very excited. And that's great because for a moment there, I hit a slump where I was like, I'm not going to be excited about summer knitting. I cannot find it in me to come up with ideas or plans just for it all to fall out of place and to not like it in the end and it all to fail. And that happens. And then all it took was one really good pattern like the Sailor Swift top to get me excited again and to allow my mind to branch out and think of the ways that I could make summer knitting work for me. And now I'm just so excited. I don't want summer to end. And that is an amazing, amazing, amazing feeling. The good news is too, I already have my plans for fall and winter knitting, I think, kind of in place. So those are going to be much, much easier to come up with, and therefore hopefully will happen in time. So as of right now, I'm calling the end of summer what it is at that September 21st mark. I think that's going to be a really great time for me to start all of my fall and winter knitting plans and still get them done at the times that I'd like to. And I think that gives me plenty of time to at least get a couple of these main projects done and still have a little time to wear them when they're complete. So those are the plans, you guys. I hope that you can get excited with me, as these are the projects you'll also see me working over on my podcast, which, if you don't know, I do post a weekly podcast video every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So definitely please feel free to check that out while you're over here as well. Otherwise, I'd love to know what you are all knitting on this summer, especially if it is a summer knit. Please help those of us who are struggling or have struggled a little bit with coming up with these summer knitting plans so that we can all keep enjoying our knits throughout the summer. And remember that It's okay to fall into these knitting slumps. I just hope that you find the thing that pulls you out of it. All right, if you enjoyed this video, I would so appreciate it if you would go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you subscribe and ring the bell, you'll be notified every time I post a new video, just like this one. And like I said, those podcasts are every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Big ol' thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next one. All right, you guys. Bye!